This is the story of a man known as the Strangler of Strasbourg, or the Strangler of La Robertsau, named after the district of Strasbourg in France where he operated. It's a man who in the 80s essayed a girl and murdered a teenager, and who in the years that followed can legitimately believe he has slipped through the cracks and will never be caught. He moves to another region, gets married, has a daughter, and 26 years later, one day, the police come knocking at his door to demand answers. It all started on the evening of January 21st, 1986, in Strasbourg, on the ground floor of the apartment at 26 Quai Zorn. There lives a family, a couple with their 2 girls. After dinner, the parents let them watch a cartoon on TV, and after they go to bed each in their own room. Marion, 10 years old, gets into bed. She is falling asleep when a shadow leans over her. Marion is paralyzed, her breath taken away. Someone has entered the apartment, and she will have a hard time recounting what happened next, undoubtedly a traumatic experience. The man strangles her with a cord, essays her, and leaves. When she comes to her senses, she finds herself lying on the floor in the hallway. She feels cold, unwell, but she doesn't fully realize what has happened to her yet. She gets up, still half asleep, and goes to her room where she lies down and falls asleep again. It's only the next morning, upon waking up, that she realizes and tells her mom that someone strangled her. The mother hugs the girl, and they both go into the living room, where the girl notices that there are police officers throughout the apartment. Because when they woke up, her parents found the door open and disorder everywhere. They thought it was a burglary and called the police, but it wasn't just a burglary. Marion heads to the bathroom, looks at herself in the mirror, and sees marks around her neck, red eyes, and one eye bruised. Apart from that, the police discovered a broken window, but no other traces. The police ask Marion what the man looked like, but she didn't get a good look at him. She assists in creating a rather vague composite sketch. The police return a few days later with a photo album of sex offenders in the area. They ask Marion if she recognizes the man who harmed her. She looks at the photos one by one, but doesn't recognize any of them. 2 weeks later, the family phone rings in their apartment. The father goes to pick up the phone, and then a man on the other end of the line asks him if the girl he essayed last time is all right. The father, surprised, asks him to repeat himself. The man says again if the girl he essayed is all right. The father immediately asks who's on the line, and the man replies, "Guess, it's me who paid you a visit last time." Trying to identify the person, the father asks for his name. The man, with a mocking laugh, answers Zorro and hangs up the phone. The bastard was taunting Marion's parents. Fortunately, the police had tapped the phone line, and that's how they have a recording of the assailant in their file. But in 1986, technology didn't allow tracing back a phone call. They couldn't determine its origin. So they hand the tape over to a psychiatric expert and ask him to profile the man in some way. The psychiatrist frankly takes on the task. He believes the assailant is a young man who lives alone in a studio apartment, or possibly with his mother. He would have average intelligence and would be a major pervert with sadistic tendencies, someone who enjoys causing pain. For now, that's all they have, and they believe that he's ready to strike again at any moment. 3 months later, on March 17th, 1986, less than 2 kilometers from Marion's home, a man breaks into a ground-floor 2-room apartment belonging to 2 sisters. Both were students, Patricia and Martine Rice, aged 17 and 18. The next day, Martine Rice is found dead in her pajama on the floor, and next to her body, a small tuft of hair is discovered. It belongs to Martine. The bastard wanted to take a souvenir but then forgot it. The psychiatrist from the previous case was right. He's a major pervert. The assailant also attacked her sister, Patricia. She recounts that she was sleeping and was suddenly awakened with a cord around her neck and a man attempting to strangle her. At that moment, she screamed. She screamed so loudly that the man panicked and fled the scene. In his panic, he left his cord at the foot of the bed. Today, with DNA testing, it would be a goldmine, but back then, it wasn't of much use. He also left 2 clear handprints on the dressing table near the bed. It's the impressions of his palms. But again, in 1986, it wasn't very helpful. There were no databases for palm prints at the time, unlike today. Apart from that, he entered through the bathroom window. The glass was broken, and there was a stone on the floor. So should we make the connection with Marion's case? Well, yes, because the similarities are numerous. First, the neighborhood. Second, the cord used for strangulation. Third, the broken window. Fourth, the ground floor apartment. So it's the same judge who is in charge of both cases. In the years that follow, there are no new developments. After 2 years, in an attempt to reignite the investigation, the police decide to broadcast the strangler's recorded phone call on France 3 television. Maybe someone will recognize his voice. But no one calls. No one recognized the voice. And then the years pass, with no new leads and no sign of the strangler striking again. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years without any progress. 20 years later, little Marion has become a 30-year-old woman. She thinks about it every night before going to bed. Will someone enter her room? She has nightmares every night. Often she wakes up abruptly, pulled from sleep by her own screams. But don't think the police have given up on the case. Throughout all these years, the file remains in a drawer, and every new police officer reads it. And when they have some free time, they take it out and review it. 22 years after Marion's assault and Martini's murder, the investigation takes an unexpected turn. In the early 2000s, France created a database for palm prints. From that moment on, when someone is suspected in a criminal case, and especially when convicted, not only are their fingerprints taken, but also their palm prints, the impressions of both palms. The police in Strasbourg, who, I must emphasize, never gave up on this case, uploaded the 2 palm prints of the strangler to the database. Initially, of course, it couldn't yield results because there were few prints in the database, but the years went by and the database grew. And one day in 2012, on September 18th, there was a match. The technician from the judicial police immediately informs detectives in Strasbourg. Incredible! 26 years later, we might finally catch him. The guy in question had stolen a wallet from a locker at a swimming pool in Saint-Jean-du-Lac, near Bordeaux. His name is Nicolas Charbonnier. Well, let's not get ahead of our interrogation. The guy might have been a friend of Martin Rice back then, in which case there are good reasons why his palm print would be on the nightstand. And then he stole a wallet. He is a thief. It's not exactly the same profile of a murderer and strangler. So the police decide not rush to arrest him immediately. For 4 months. This is unbelievable, but it's true. The detectives prepared for his interrogation. They practiced by switching roles, playing the suspect one moment and a police officer the next. What questions to ask him? What will he answer? And when they are ready, on January 21st, 2013, they storm into Saint-Jean-de-Lac to apprehend Nicolas Charbonnier. The guy lives an ordinary life. He's divorced, has a young daughter, has a temporary employment. The police let him drop his daughter off at school, and when he returns home, detectives show up at his door. "Good morning, sir. We are from the judicial police in Strasbourg. From this moment on, you are under arrest." They don't say anything else to him. They don't tell him about the murder or the essays. Nothing. He doesn't resist. But when he sees him, the police chief thinks it's their guy. He is sure of it. And now he needs to confess. They have an ace up their sleeve, the palm print. But they can't just lay it out on the table right away. According to their plan, he must be the one to play the first card. They ask him, "You lived in Strasbourg in the 80s, Mr. Charbonnier, didn't you?" He replies that yes, he lived in Strasbourg with his parents. but he never committed any crimes of any kind there. The police's plan is to make him feel that they have an advantage. Evidence is that they are keeping to themselves. Charbonnier explains that at that time, he met someone. It was kind of like his mentor, and this person led him into mischief, like petty burglaries. The officers then have him list these burglaries. And at one point, he remembers going to a ground-floor apartment. It was on Cuizorn, number 26. That's it. He's confessed that he's been in Marion's house, the little girl who's been SA. And there, he's caught, because it wasn't at Marion's where they found the palm print. It was at Martine's. The trap worked. If he went to Marion's, it means he went to Martine's. And not because she was a friend, but to kill her. Truly masterful. The art of interrogation taken to perfection. And now, they lay everything out on the table for him. He's in for murder, SA, and attempted murder. Charbonnier denies everything outright. Following his arrest, the news spread through the press. And you know journalists, they seize the opportunity to replay the recording of the Strangler. At this point, the police have wiretapped Charbonnier's whole family. His parents, siblings, everyone is tapped. Here's what's being said in the Charbonnier household. Did you hear the news on TV? That's Nicolas' voice. It's definitely him. Who is better placed than family to recognize a relative's voice? Thank you to the journalists. Nicolas Charbonnier is brought to court in front of an investigating judge for his indictment. Charbonnier still denies everything. The judge plays the recording of his family, their reaction when they heard the Strangler's voice on TV. He hears his family, his sisters, his parents, gossiping, recognizing his voice. And then he breaks down. He admits to the crime but asks for time to explain the details. To confront him with his responsibility, the judge orders a reconstruction at the apartment on 26 Cuizorn in Strasbourg, where Marion was SA 27 years earlier. And there she is, Marion. She was 10 years old. Now she's 37. Honestly, she doesn't recognize him. He demonstrates how he broke the window. But after that, it gets complicated. They placed a plastic dummy the size of a 10-year-old girl in Marion's former bedroom, in her bed. He refuses to redo the gesture. A police officer has to do it for him. Throughout this 5-hour reconstruction, he isn't very talkative. He constantly repeats, "I'm sorry, I don't remember." And he never looks at Marion, not even for a minute. As the investigation progresses, he eventually admits to both crimes, Marion's SA and Martine's murder. In their archives, the police find another SA committed with the same modus operandi in the same neighborhood around the same time, in November 1986. It's surprising they didn't connect the dots back then. The victim's name is Marie. He then admits to breaking into her home, committing burglary but not the strangulation. He claims to have just shoved her, causing her to hit her head on a table. And then he left, abandoning his ropes. If you analyze all these assaults together, you realize that Charbonnier acted within a 2 kilometers radius of his parents' home, where he lived. He always operated at night, so he could walk back home afterwards. In total, he's indicted for 1 murder, 1 attempted murder, and SA. Nicolas Charbonnier's trial opens on March 17, 2016, in Strasbourg. 30 years after the events. When he enters the court, he obviously doesn't look anything like the image people had of the Strangler of Strasbourg. He's an ordinary 50-year-old man who looks weak and harmless. A father whose own daughter is the same age Marion was when he attacked her. Trials often begin with a portrait of the accused. And there, of course, they try to understand what could have triggered his crimes when he was 20 years old. He was born into a practicing Catholic family with 9 other siblings. His father was in the military, and his mother was a housekeeper. But when I say his father was in the military, he was more than that. He was a senior officer, top of his class after his training and well-respected. And he too, Nicolas, wanted to become a soldier, and that might be where the break lies. After 5 years in the army, he became a corporal. He announced that he was quitting. He told his friends from that time that being in military is not for him. In reality, his military record describes him as mediocre. So it was at that moment, in 1985, that he returned to his little room at his parents' house in Strasbourg, and it was then that he became a predator. He thought to himself, since he couldn't be good for others, he would excel in the opposite direction, in evil, in darkness. When he called himself Zorro, he wasn't a masked avenger. He was the avenger of his own failures, the avenger of his failed life. And then, as soon as he left Strasbourg and moved near Bordeaux, he stopped everything. According to psychiatrists, he has what is called a split personality. That is to say, for all those years, he locked away his crimes in a box, which allowed him to live without any guilt. Now, we are obviously eagerly awaiting the testimony of his ex-wife, the mother of his daughter, with whom he had an entirely ordinary life. But she was very shocked to hear his past. She recounts that Nicolas, who was her husband for 20 years, was an ideal partner. He was an ideal father to their daughter. When their daughter was born in 2005, he stopped working to take care of her. She was too busy with her job. And after their divorce, they remained friends. There is a stark contrast between the acts for which he is accused and the man described by his ex-wife. Next comes the testimony of the victims, but the testimony that stands out the most is that of Marion. She enters the room. There, she is overcome with anxiety. She leaves, goes outside with her lawyer, and returns. She steps up to the stand. She clasps her hands together. And 30 years later, in tears, she tells her heartbreaking story. In his dock, Charbonnier breaks down. The hearing is suspended. After 2.5 hours of deliberation, the verdict is announced. Nicolas Charbonnier, 30 years after his crimes, is sentenced to life in prison, and he does not appeal. If you enjoyed our deep dives into the world of true crime, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.